So we're going to look at the bottom of the AJAX request here. So here we've got AJAX request. So again, using this object, and this is setting up that communication behind the scenes. So we're doing AJAX request and we're doing open. And what this is doing, this is just specifying the method and then the URL that we're going to be using and whether it's asynchronous. So if we're doing true, that means we're doing asynchronous. If we're doing false, that means we're doing synchronous. And the main difference between the asynchronous and the synchronous is that asynchronous, when this is set to true, it means that we're waiting for a function that's going to get executed once the response is ready. So once everything is ready, then we're going to go through and we're going to execute the function, but only when it's when the onReady state change event is true. And what that means is that when we do have a value that gets returned here, then we are able to complete this. And that's what asynchronous and synchronous. And in most cases, you're going to be setting it to true asynchronous. But if you're setting it to false, then you do have to actually keep that change, that's get element by ID result inner HTML. You should do that after the send has been completed, because it's no longer going to be running it asynchronously, it's going to be running it afterwards. But again, generally it's better to keep it as true, because of the fact that if you do have any issues or connection issues, you do want it to wait through to load that file if it's really necessary for that to work within your JavaScript. And most of the time when you are setting up an AJAX function or an AJAX call, it is going to be an essential part of what's happening on the website. So you do want to set it as true, and it's always better to keep it as true. And then here, of course, we've got the URL. So we're just sending over all of this data. We're sending it as within the PHP file. We've accepted a GET request value, and so that's what we're doing here. Is that this allows us to really easily include that name value within the GET. And here we've got check PHP name equals and then the username value. So again, the differences between get and post, most of the time, depending on what your requirements again are, is that there's the differences between get and post. And you just got to be mindful of the fact that get isn't as secure as post is, as well as if you're sending a large amount of data, it's going to be a lot harder to send it in get than it would be with post, because post really has no size limitations. It depends on your server settings, of course, but you can send a whole bunch more data in post than you can in get. And also, if you don't want the file to get cached, and if you're updating a database on the server or something like that, you might want to send it as post instead of sending it as get. But in this case, because we've got the array there and it's not really going to be something that we're trying to lock down for this tutorial, we're just keeping it as get. But again, you do have those options, so you could do post, but then you have to change the format of check accordingly as well. Again, if you do need to use post, and if you are sending over form data, encrypted, sensitive form data, you have to add in that post value there. So what I've done is I've just done a quick update here, and I've also added in the set request header so that we know what type of header information is. So if we've got some form data, sensitive form data, we know what type of the content type. And then down here at the bottom, we've added in, where we had just had the send function there, we've added in name equals, and this is how we're able to pass in that username. So if you had additional values here, you could do something like this, adding in that ampersand, and if you had something like that, you could add in additional name values within this type of format. So this will now send over last name as well. but this isn't going to be necessary within our example, so we're just going to keep that out. So when I changed the post over here, I also had to change the post in the PHP file, and when I go over to here and I refresh it, I can see that it's still working. Everything is still functioning as before, except that we're using post. And now when I refresh it here, we're not able to get the value of name anymore on this PHP file. So it's just returning that default value. So even though when we do go over 4 characters, it's no longer functioning because we don't have that get in here anymore, that we're just doing post. So again, if you are using databases, you should always make sure that you are using post, because you don't want someone to be able to access your database and to do a bunch of queries to this address and be able to access it that way. So always a better idea, more secure.